The letter slipped from Emily's trembling hands, falling onto the soaked asphalt. The sound of the rain echoed around her, like an army of drums beating against her skin, each drop marking a frantic beat in her chest. She bent down, her heart racing, but she didn't quite touch the paper. Warm, calloused, steady hands reached it first. Emily lifted her face, and the air rushed out of her, as if the world had stopped for a moment. It wasn't the man she was about to marry. It was his brother. And at his eyes, the same warmth, the same longing that overflowed from the letters she'd been reading, secretly for the past 2 months. Letters unsigned, but filled with words that pierced her soul like blades of tenderness. Now, standing before him, she understood. It wasn't coincidence, it was fate. The rain seemed to ease, as if the city too was holding its breath, waiting for the next step. The paper, protected by those hands, wasn't just a letter, it was a silent confession, a bond that united. 2 souls before they even recognized each other. Emily felt a whirlwind, the secure love she had promised another, and the intense, raw, forbidden flame that burned there before her. He, with his lips parted, seemed to struggle against something as powerful as the storm. For a moment no one spoke, only their eyes met, and in that meeting were questions, promises, and a danger neither of them dared to name. If this moment already made your heart race, just wait until you see what comes next. Subscribe and like now, because what happens next will change everything. He took a step forward, so close that Emily felt his warmth even through the chilly wind of the rain. His voice was firm, but it held a tremor that didn't come from the cold. "I can't let you make that mistake." The words hung between them, as if the air itself had become too heavy to breathe. Emily opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a scream pierced the storm. "Emily!" The sound made her heart skip a beat. She turned slowly, as if fearing what she might find. There he was, her fiancé, standing a few feet away, drenched, his gaze dark as the night that enveloped them. But it wasn't the tone of his voice or his expression that made the ground disappear beneath Emily's feet. In his hand was another letter. For a moment the world seemed to spin more slowly. The streets became grey blurs, the rain a distant murmur. The groom clenched his fist around the paper, as if afraid the wind would steal it away, or that Emily would see it all. Emily looked at the man in front of her, then at the man calling her. The first still held the letter that had fallen to the ground. The second held his up, like a silent accusation. 2 letters, 2 stories, or the same one, told by different hands. Thunder ripped across the sky, and the question burned within her. Which of them was telling the truth? And which carried the lie that would destroy her? 2 months earlier, Emily had lived a quiet, almost predictable, life in the small coastal town of Ashford, Maine. The kind of place where the sea breeze brought not only the salty smell of the waves, but also rumors that spread faster than the tide. Here, secrets rarely remained hidden, and everyone knew every detail of each other's lives. Raised by her uncle since the loss of her parents in an accident, Emily had grown up with an unshakable sense of responsibility. He had taught her that duty and honor came before any whims of the heart. So when her uncle arranged her marriage to Daniel Harper, the son of a respected and wealthy Boston businessman, she didn't protest, not out of passion, but out of gratitude, and also because she had learned all too soon that love stories rarely withstand the weight of reality. It was then that the letters started arriving, simple envelopes with no return address. Inside, kind words, phrases that touched forgotten places in the soul, poetic lines describing the sea, the sky, and even details about Emily herself that she never imagined anyone would notice. They were letters written by someone who seemed to see her, like no one else. Little by little, she began to wait for them, like someone waiting for the tide to rise, bringing something precious. She began to imagine what it would be like to live with this man who knew her only through words. But when she met Daniel in person, she felt the shock. He was polite, yes, impeccably polished, but as cold as the Ashford waters in winter. Formal. Conversations, brief glances, and a distance that couldn't be explained solely by shyness. Nothing about him resembled the man in the letters. Until, one grey afternoon, in the garden of her uncle's house, Michael, Daniel's younger brother, let slip a sentence identical to one of the letters Emily had so carefully guarded. Emily's world swayed for a moment. If Michael was the author, why hide? And even more dangerous, what would happen if Daniel found out? The rain was still falling lightly when Emily decided she could no longer live with that doubt gnawing at her every thought. The letters had become a part of her. Every sentence, every word-painted image, every veiled confession. And now, the brother of the man she was going to marry had blurted out something that confirmed the impossible. She waited for the right moment when Daniel was away and went to Michael. He was leaning against the pier's railing, his gaze lost in the choppy sea, as if searching for answers in the foam. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the sea air mix with the tension coursing through her body, and asked bluntly, "It was you. The letters were you, weren't they?" For a moment, the sound of the waves seemed to swallow the silence between them. Michael didn't look away from the horizon. He simply ran his hand through his damp hair and let out a sigh that sounded more like a confession. Then he turned to her, and his eyes held something that made her shiver. "I wrote it, but it was to help. Daniel, he isn't good with words. I thought it would make a good impression." The words were simple, almost logical, but his gaze said something else. It was deep, intense, as if there was an untold story behind every syllable. Emily felt the ground shake. If those letters were just a show to please her brother, why did Michael write as if he knew every detail of her heart? Why did he make her feel so alive with every line? She tried to keep her voice steady. So, every sentence, every memory, that felt like it was mine alone, was all a trick. Michael took a step toward her, and the distance between them became dangerously small. The smell of salt and rain enveloped him. He hesitated, but not long enough to hide the intensity of his expression. "I didn't expect—" he began, but stopped, as if about to say something that couldn't be unsaid. "I didn't expect to feel anything. I was just trying to help you." Emily realized there was more. Every muscle in his face betrayed an internal struggle. Her heart raced, and she felt like if she stayed there a minute longer, she'd discover something that could change everything. But before she could press him, footsteps echoed down the pier. She turned and saw Daniel coming toward her, his expression as grim as ever. Michael quickly walked away as if nothing had happened. Daniel looked at her and asked if everything was okay, but Emily didn't respond immediately. Michael's words, and even more so what he didn't say, swirled in her mind. That night, alone in her room, Emily reread each letter. She looked for signs, clues she might have missed. There were feelings there that couldn't be explained simply by helping someone make a good impression. Each metaphor seemed written by someone who truly felt, someone who had observed, remembered, and preserved pieces of herself that she herself hadn't even known she was revealing. The wind blew hard against the window as Emily made a decision. She needed to know how deep these half-truths went. Deep down, she feared the answer, but even more so, she feared living without knowing it. The next day, she would seek out Michael again. But that morning, as sleep finally overcame her, a soft crack at the door woke her. When she opened it, there was no one there, just an envelope left on the floor, the same paper, the same handwriting, and a single sentence written on it. "Don't trust everything he says." Emily's heart raced, but who he was still unclear. The sky was overcast, and the breeze from the sea carried the strong scent of salt, mixed with the foreboding of a storm. Emily waited for the right moment to meet Daniel. She didn't want to risk Michael showing up and turning the conversation even more tense. However, seeing her fiancé sitting in his office, leafing through documents with the attention of someone examining million-dollar contracts, she felt the weight of every word she was about to say. She approached slowly, the sound of her own footsteps, muffled by the thick carpet. "Daniel," he began, his voice low but firm, "I need to talk about the letters." He didn't look up immediately, as if he hadn't heard. He turned a page, made a quick note, and only then did he look at her. "What letters?" he asked blankly, as if she'd mentioned something irrelevant. Emily swallowed. "The ones I received over the past 2 months. I thought they were yours. Until I realized they might not be." The silence that followed was sharp. Daniel leaned back in, his chair crossing his arms. "I don't see why that's important right now." She took a step forward, feeling the tension rise. "Isn't it important?" Those were words that changed everything for me, that made me believe there was something between us beyond an agreement. "I need to know the truth." He sighed, looking away to the window, where the first drops were beginning to streak the glass. "Emily, sometimes it's better not to know every detail." The answer hit her like a cold wind. "So you're admitting you didn't write?" she insisted. Daniel frowned, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm saying you're clinging to something meaningless. We have a planned future. These letters, whoever they come from, don't change what's going to happen." Emily felt her heart sink. He spoke as if marriage were a business deal, not a union. "For me, it changes everything. Because if it wasn't you, then—" "So what?" he interrupted, his voice harder. "Are you going to throw it all away for a few pretty words on paper?" The pain of hearing that mixed with anger. "Maybe I just want to know if I'll marry a man who lies." Daniel didn't answer. He just picked up the papers on the table and began to arrange them, as if the conversation were over. Emily stood there, staring at him, searching for some trace of regret, some sign that there was still something to salvage. She found none. She left the office with firm steps, but inside, her world seemed to crumble. Every beat of her heart brought more questions. If Daniel really knew who had written the letters, why did he refuse to talk? And worse, why did he seem so bothered that he wanted to bury the matter forever? As he closed the door behind him, he heard, muffled by the sound of the rain, the soft click of a drawer being locked. A quick, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that sparked a dangerous suspicion. Perhaps the answers he was seeking were closer than he imagined, and perhaps Daniel had much more to hide. The morning was grey. The sea, choppy as if it held secrets threatening to surface. Emily was walking along the narrow strip of sand, the cold wind whipping her hair, when she saw Michael leaning against an old wooden fence, his coat open, staring at the horizon, with the expression of someone carrying a weight he could no longer hide. She hesitated before approaching, but the desire for answers overcame any caution. Her footsteps sank into the damp sand, announcing her presence. He turned slowly, and there was a strange gleam in his eyes, a mixture of weariness and determination. "We need to talk," Emily said, feeling her heart beat faster. Michael nodded, as if he already knew what was coming. They stood there, face to face, the sound of the waves the only witness. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to walk through a door he couldn't close. "When I wrote the first letter," he began, "it was just a favor. Daniel, he wanted to make a good impression, but he never knew how to express himself. I thought I was just helping." Emily kept her gaze fixed on him, but something in his voice made her realize there was more. "And then?" he asked, tension vibrating in his words. Michael looked away to the sea, his hands clenching in his pockets. "Then, every word started to mean something to me. I was writing with you in mind, not him. Every detail I described, every invented memory, turned out to be more true than I wanted to admit." The world seemed to spin slowly for Emily. The wind carried the distant sound of seagulls, but all she heard was the pounding of her own blood. The letters that had stirred her soul weren't just a hoax, they were confessions, and not to Daniel, but to her. "You should have told me," he said, his voice shaking but not with anger. "Before it became this." He took a step toward her, and the space between them filled with something dense, almost palpable. "I wanted to," he admitted. "But at the same time, I didn't want you to see me as the man who stole something from your own brother. I wanted you to be free to feel without the shadow of choice." Emily felt the weight of his words like waves crashing over her. There was danger there, a precipice, where every step could change everything. What did she feel? Anger? Relief? Fascination? Maybe a little of each. "And now?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "What do you expect me to do with this?" Michael kept his gaze locked on hers, as if searching for an answer that could only be found within those eyes. "I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that every letter was real, even if the initial agreement was a lie." The wind blew stronger, and Emily hugged herself, not because of the cold, but to keep herself together. Everything seemed more complicated now. The arranged marriage, Daniel's coldness, Michael's intensity, and at the center of it all, those letters that were both lies and truth. He took another step, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her. But Michael just stopped, so close that she could feel the heat of his body contrasting with the chilly air. "Do you have feelings for me, Emily?" he asked quietly, as if afraid of the question itself. Her heart leapt, the words caught in her throat, choked by the weight of the choice that was beginning to loom. Before she could respond, a noise coming from the path leading to the beach made them instinctively step back. Quick, steady footsteps approached. Emily turned and saw Daniel appear, his expression grim, his gaze darting from one to the other, as if he'd just found an important piece of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to put together. In the next instant, the wind seemed to cease, and Emily knew that this moment would be the beginning of something no one could control. The salon was filled with the soft sound of female voices, the rustle of fabric, and the clink of hangers being pushed along the trail. Between dress fittings and meticulous adjustments, Emily found herself surrounded by mirrors that reflected an image increasingly distant from who she truly was. The lace, the veil, the impeccable white, everything felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of a destiny she hadn't chosen. As the seamstress marked the hem of the dress, she forced a smile, responded with, "It's beautiful," and nodded politely, but inside she felt like an actress in a role she hadn't rehearsed. The afternoons were filled with meetings with planners, tastings, flower selections, and finalizing the endless guest list. Every decision seemed to be made to please her uncle Daniel and the Harper family, except her. Emily realized that with each passing day, she was losing a piece of herself, as if the person who read letters by lamplight, her heart racing, was disappearing under the demands of a perfect wedding in everyone's eyes but her own. And it was during this period that Michael began to disappear. At first, it was just brief responses when they passed each other in the hallway, a quick glance before looking away. Then he began to avoid being in the same rooms. He would disappear during family gatherings, leave early to take care of business, and arrive late. Emily felt his absence like an invisible cut, and his silence weighed more heavily than any unspoken word. She tried to convince herself it was for the best, that perhaps distance was necessary for everything to calm down, but the void Michael left was impossible to ignore. During the fitting for a second dress, while the dressmaker was talking about embroidery, Emily found herself remembering his comment about how the ivory color brought out the sparkle in her eyes, a comment she had never heard from Daniel. The days went by, and the feeling of suffocation grew. She found herself performing each task like a mechanical duty, while inside something was begging for air. Michael, for his part, seemed determined to keep his distance, as if mere proximity were too dangerous. But Emily could tell, in the rare moments their eyes met, that he too was being eaten away by it. One rainy afternoon, she saw him in the garden, absent-mindedly fiddling with his wristwatch. The urge to go to him almost overcame her, but Michael turned away first, walking in the opposite direction without even noticing her. Emily felt the rejection burn like ice on her skin. Maybe he was right. Maybe silence was the only way to protect them both. But then, why did it hurt so much? The guest lists grew, the dress fittings multiplied, and the date approached like an inevitable wave. With each passing day, Emily felt more like a spectator of her own life. It was as if she were being pushed to the altar by forces beyond her control, while the truest part of herself, the one awakened by the letters, moved away along with Michael. The night they received the final printed invitation, Emily sat alone in the living room, staring at her and Daniel's names side by side in gold letters. The paper smelled faintly of ink and formality. She held it for a while until, without thinking, she put it back in the drawer where she hid her letters. When she opened it, the scent of the old paper wafted up, bringing back everything she'd been trying to bury. She touched the letters with her fingertips and realized her heart still beat differently when she thought of him. But before she could lose herself in the memory, she heard voices in the hallway. Daniel was talking to his uncle, and Michael's name was mentioned in a low, almost conspiratorial tone. Emily stopped to listen, but the words were lost amid the sound of retreating footsteps. All that remained was the echo of an uneasy feeling. Something was happening out of sight, and deep down, she knew. It wasn't just the marriage that was at stake. The house was silent, broken only by the distant sound of rain beating against the windows. Emily sat in the library chair, pretending to read one of the books she'd pulled randomly from the shelf. The air seemed thicker that night, charged, with something she couldn't name. That's when she heard slow, rhythmic footsteps approaching, as if the walker were carefully choosing each movement. Michael appeared in the doorway, his shadow cast across the illuminated hallway. For a moment, they just stared at each other, as if there had been a silent agreement not to say anything. He entered, closing the door behind him, and Emily's breath quickened. Michael walked toward her without taking his eyes off her, and when he was close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body, he leaned in slightly. Between his fingers lay a folded envelope. Without a word, he took her hand, and almost imperceptibly let the paper rest in her palm. The contact was brief, but intense enough for Emily to feel the electric current that seemed to course through them both. When she looked down, she noticed the difference. The envelope didn't have Daniel's name on it. There was no subterfuge, no disguise. It was from him to her. Looking up, she found a firm, almost defiant gaze, as if Michael were ready to face any consequences. "Read it when you're alone," he said, his voice low and urgent. Then he took a step back and, before Emily could say anything, left the room. Her heart was beating frantically. She tried to resist her curiosity, but the tension was unbearable. She got up, checked that no one was following her, and went upstairs to her room. The rain was getting heavier outside, and each clap of thunder seemed to punctuate the weight of the moment. She sat on the edge of the bed and with trembling hands opened the envelope. Inside, a single note. Michael's unmistakable handwriting, but this time without careful metaphors, without the mask of previous letters. The words were direct. "Emily, don't wait any longer. Tomorrow night meet me at the pier. Come alone. Let's go." She reread the sentence several times, feeling the weight of each syllable. Escape. The word echoed within her, as dangerous as it was tempting. Images came to mind, the life she would leave behind, the marriage she never wanted, and the silent promise of freedom with him. But the risks also came. Daniel's wrath, the town's judgment, the definitive break with the uncle who had raised her. The rest of the night was a whirlwind. Emily paced the room like a prisoner about to soar through the bars, weighing the cost of her own freedom. She touched the note, put it away, picked it up again, as if the simple act of holding it could bring clarity. But the only clarity she felt was that Michael no longer wanted to play by the imposed limits. The next morning, over coffee, Emily tried to act natural. Daniel talked business with his uncle, oblivious to the tension burning inside her. Michael wasn't there, and his absence was like a hidden flame that simultaneously warmed and threatened to burn. The day dragged on. Every minute seemed to weigh heavily on Emily's shoulders, and as night began to fall, the invitation in her pocket seemed to pulse against her skin. At 11, she stood at her bedroom window, staring out into the darkness. The house was asleep. The sound of the ocean came like a distant call. All she had to do was grab her coat, go downstairs, and head to the pier. One step was all it took. But as she touched the doorknob, a noise in the hallway made her freeze. Slow, heavy footsteps approached the door. She stepped back, the note still hidden in her hand, and in that moment she realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. The morning began with a strange silence in Harper's house. It wasn't the tranquil silence of established routines, but a dense, almost palpable silence, like the air before a storm. Emily came downstairs earlier than usual, Michael's note still hidden in the back of the drawer, along with the old letters. She tried to act normal, but something in the atmosphere betrayed that something serious was about to happen. From the hallway, he heard low, rapid voices coming from Daniel's office. At first, he thought it was another business conversation, but then he recognized the tone, tense, clipped. He approached slowly, and the sound became clearer. "Care to explain what this means?" Daniel's voice was thick with suppressed fury. Emily risked a peek through the crack in the door. Daniel was standing, leaning over the table, clutching a piece of paper so tightly he looked like he wanted to tear it. Michael stood on the other side, motionless, his fists clenched at his sides. Emily recognized the crumpled paper, the note she'd received the night before. "Where did you find this?" Michael asked, his voice low but firm. "In her room," Daniel replied, without taking his eyes off his brother. "And don't tell me it's not your handwriting." The silence that followed was almost more deafening than a scream. Michael didn't deny it. He simply held his brother's gaze, and in that instant, Emily realized there was much more between them than just rivalry. There were old hurts, resentment simmering like embers that now found fuel. "So that's it?" Daniel took a step forward. "While I was planning a wedding, you were writing this?" He held up the note as if it were proof of irreparable betrayal. An invitation to run away. Michael took a deep breath but didn't back down. "I couldn't stand by and watch her get pushed into something she doesn't want." The answer set Daniel ablaze. "You're not the one to decide what she wants," he roared, his voice echoing through the room. "It's always been this way, hasn't it? Always trying to take what's mine." "It's not about you, Daniel," Michael said, calmer, but with a firmness that made his words sharp. "It's about her, and if you don't realize it, maybe you never really cared." Emily held her breath, her heart racing. The words cut like blades, and each sentence seemed to deepen an invisible wound between the siblings. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway broke the tension. Emily's uncle appeared in the doorway, his gaze darting between them, trying to understand what was happening. "What's going on here?" "Ask your nephew," Daniel said, tossing the note onto the table. The paper slid to a stop in front of his uncle, who read it quickly, his brow furrowing with each line. When he looked up at Michael, there was something cold and accusatory in his gaze. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice low but full of menace. Michael didn't answer right away. He looked at Emily, who remained hidden in the doorway, not daring to enter. His eyes said more than any words. He didn't regret it. The uncle closed his hand around the note. "You've put more at risk than you know. It's not just about the two of you." Daniel took a step back, but anger still vibrated in every muscle. "Get out of this house, Michael, now." The silence that followed was crushing. Michael, chin high, stared at his brother for what seemed like an eternity. Then, without another word, he crossed the office and walked past Emily. In the brief moment their eyes met, she saw something. Not defeat, but a silent promise. A few seconds later, the front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the house as a signal that nothing would ever be the same again. And Emily knew that the storm within the Harper family was just beginning. The night seemed endless. Emily lay in bed, but there was no rest. The room was plunged into darkness, lit only by the sporadic flash of lightning streaking the sky. Each distant crack of thunder rattled the window pane, but nothing could muffle the sound of her own thoughts. She tossed and turned between the sheets, the fabric cool against her skin and restlessness burning inside. Michael's note was there, folded in four, hidden in the drawer beside the bed. Emily didn't need to touch it to remember every word. "Let's go." 2 simple words, but they had the power to undo everything she had built, or perhaps everything that had been built for her, without her having been consulted. She closed her eyes and tried to hold on to logic. There was a commitment to Daniel, a promise made to the uncle who had raised her, a name that was about to join hers on official papers and under the gaze of the entire town. Running away with Michael meant breaking not only with her fiancé, but with her family, with her security, with the predictable world she knew. It would be like jumping off a cliff without knowing whether there was water or rocks waiting at the bottom. But then the memory came. The letters. Every sentence that had given her life these past few months. The way Michael looked at her, as if he saw parts of her she hadn't even known. And above all, the certainty that he wanted her for who she was, not what she represented. With Daniel there was only formality, a marriage that felt like a contract. With Michael there was risk, but there was truth. He turned sideways, facing the window. The rain was getting heavier, and the sound of drops hitting the glass mingled with the hurried rhythm of his own heart. He wondered if true love didn't demand just this, breaking promises, defying rules, following the impulse no one else understands. Or if this was just a foolish impulse, capable of destroying more lives than it saved. She remembered her uncle's look on his face the day he announced their engagement. He seemed so proud, so certain he was offering her a better future. Would running away with Michael be an unforgivable betrayal in his eyes? Or, deep down, did he understand that you can't bind someone's heart forever? The hours passed, and the insomnia became almost physical, as if her entire body refused to rest before making a decision. Emily sat up in bed, her feet touching the cold floor. The clock read 3 in the morning. She ran a hand through her hair and approached the drawer. When she opened it, the note seemed to pulse in the darkness. She picked it up carefully, as if holding something that might explode, and read it again, feeling. The words hit her deeply. If it were, there would be no going back. The life she knew would be over before dawn. But what if it weren't? She would spend the next few years wondering what had happened, carrying a silent regret that no white dress could erase. She put the note away and lay down, but her eyes remained open. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions, and somewhere deep inside, Emily knew that no matter what she chose, nothing would ever be simple again. When the first ray of light came through the window, she was still awake, her heart torn between duty and desire, between the promise she swore to keep and the love that could change everything. And in that silent threshold between night and day, he understood that there was no way out that would not leave scars. The morning began with a cold wind coming in from the sea, carrying a salty scent that seemed to herald something inevitable. Emily descended the stairs slowly, her heart still heavy from the sleepless night. The house was quieter than usual, as if everyone was caught up in anticipation of the wedding the next day. However, she had no idea that the day would bring a blow far deeper than any silent tension. Michael stood in the garden, near the old fig tree at the edge of the property. His open coat fluttered in the wind and he seemed lost in thought, staring off into the distance. Emily hesitated, but eventually walked toward him. Each step made her heart beat faster, as if she sensed the moment could never be undone. "You called me?" he asked, his voice almost drowned out by the rustling of the leaves. Michael turned slowly, and what she saw in his eyes made her stomach churn. There was no anger, but there was something more dangerous, a final decision. He took a deep breath, moving closer until they were just a few feet apart. "Emily, I need you to listen to me now, without interruption." His voice was firm but low, filled with urgency. "If you get married tomorrow, I'll disappear from your life forever." The words fell between them like a stone in a lake, sending ripples that echoed within her. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't. The cold wind seemed to freeze the air, and all she could hear was the sound of her own blood rushing through her veins. "You know I'm not saying this out of ego or pride," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'm saying this because I can't stand being around you and pretending nothing happened. I won't be the man who silently watches the woman he loves living with another man." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The promises she'd made to her uncle, the weight of her commitment to Daniel, all of it mingled with the intense heat that grew in her chest at those words. Part of her wanted to scream that she couldn't make such a sudden decision, that she needed time. But another part, the one that pulsed more strongly, knew time was running out. Michael, she began, but he held up his hand, interrupting her. "Don't tell me you need to think. You already know the answer, you just don't want to face it." The accusation came not with rancor, but with a painful certainty. Emily felt tears threaten, but blinked them back. She stared at the sea behind him, trying to find clarity in the steady movement of the waves. Nothing seemed clear. Nothing, except the fact that he meant what he said. "What if I don't go?" he asked in a whisper. Michael took a step forward, closing the distance. "Then, I'll stay. For you, for us. And no matter who tries to separate us." The world seemed to narrow around them, reduced to the sound of the wind and the space of a few inches between them. Emily could feel his breath, the warmth that contrasted with the morning chill. Everything in her mind screamed at her to choose a side, but her heart beat erratically, torn between two paths that seemed equally irreversible. In the distance, the front door opened. A voice called his name. It was Daniel. The sound was like a shard shattering the fragile moment. Michael took a step back but didn't look away. "Think about it, Emily. It's all or nothing." And with that, he walked slowly away, leaving her alone in the garden, with the cold wind and an ultimatum that burned hotter than any winter. Emily stood there motionless, watching him disappear around the side of the house. She knew the next few hours would be the longest of her life, and that whatever she chose, there would be no turning back. The property, its broad gnarled trunk illuminated only by a sliver of light from a distant lantern. As if something were calling her, Emily descended the stairs silently, her heart racing as she approached the garden. Michael was there, leaning against the trunk, his hands in his pockets, as if he'd known she was coming. The wind ruffled his hair, and the dim light accentuated the serious lines on his face. When he saw her, a soft gleam appeared in his eyes, not surprise but confirmation that this moment was inevitable. "I shouldn't be here," Emily whispered, stopping a few feet away from him. "And yet you came," Michael replied, his voice low, filled with something that went beyond words. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. They just watched each other as if committing every detail to memory before time stole it. Then Michael took a step forward, and another, until the distance between them was only a breath's length. "Tomorrow, everything changes," he said. "Perhaps forever." Emily felt her heart pound so hard it echoed in the silence of the garden. "Maybe you've already changed," she murmured. His gaze dropped to her lips, and in that instant, the world around them disappeared. Michael lifted his hand, lightly touching Emily's face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of his gesture. When she opened them, he was even closer. There was no more hesitation. Their lips met in an urgent kiss, full of everything they had repressed for weeks. It was sweet and desperate at the same time, as if they wanted to condense an entire life into that moment. Emily felt his hands on her waist, pulling her closer. The scent of wet earth and leaves mingled with the heat burning between them. Every second felt like a risk, every touch a promise. But then a sound broke the spell, a footstep on the gravel, a breath heavier than the wind. Emily pulled away from Michael just enough to turn her face, and there, a few feet away, standing like a statue in the shadows, was Daniel. His gaze was icy, but beneath it lay something even more dangerous. A silence charged with meaning. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He didn't make a fuss. He just stood there, watching them, as if every second were a test being burned into his memory. "Daniel," Emily began, but the word died in her mouth. He took a single step forward, the sound of his shoes on gravel echoing like a gunshot through the air. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the path that led to the house. Emily stood still, her heart racing not just from the kiss but from the knowledge that from that moment on, the next day would be much more than just a wedding. Michael held her hand, as if to stop her from running after her brother, but she could barely think. What would Daniel make of what he had just seen? And, more importantly, how far would you go to avoid losing? The interior of the Boston church was imbued with a tense silence, broken only by the murmurs echoing between the high walls and the stained glass windows, tinted by the reflection of the grey morning. The air carried the scent of incense mixed with the perfume of the flowers carefully arranged on the altar. Emily walked down the aisle, each step echoing like a drumbeat inside her chest. The dress felt heavier than it had at her last fitting, as if every fold of the fabric were made of promises and expectations that didn't belong to her. Daniel was waiting for her at the altar, impeccable in his dark suit, his expression controlled and impassive, like a man accustomed to hiding his emotions behind a wall of dignity. But for those who could read beneath the surface, there was something in his eyes, a flash of wounded pride, a shadow of anger pent up since the night before, when the image of Emily and Michael together beneath the ancient oak had seared itself into his memory like a branding iron. On the last bench, out of direct view of almost everyone, Michael sat, his jaw tense, his fists clenched on his knees. His eyes never left Emily, as if trying to memorize every detail before she was finally gone. He looked like a rope stretched to its limit, about to snap. The priest began the ceremonial words, the calm cadence contrasting with the storm brewing in Emily's heart. "Do you accept this man?" he began. Time seemed to stretch out. Emily looked at Daniel and saw in him the security of a stable life, but also the coldness of a future where her laughter would be a distant memory. She looked at Michael and saw in him the risk, the unknown, and the undeniable warmth of a love that had not been planned, but had grown between the lines of letters and stolen silences. Her breath came in short gasps. The words she should have spoken were there, ready in her mouth, but each one felt like a ton of weight. And then, as if the whole world were waiting for her next move, she felt the knot unravel. Her voice trembled, echoing through the church. She stopped before it, extended her hand, and in one simple gesture sealed a choice that would change the course of 3 lives forever. Michael stood, took her hand firmly, and for a moment the whole world ceased to exist. There was no more altar, no more judgmental glances, just the mutual certainty that no matter what, they would be together. They left the church under the weight of dozens of eyes following them, some angry, some incredulous, and few with anything that could be called understanding. Outside, the chilly Boston air cut through the stifling heat inside. Emily took a deep breath, as if breathing for the first time in years. In years to come, she would look back and remember that moment as the point at which she stopped living the life she'd been told she should want. She lost status, security, and the approval of many. But she gained something priceless, the life she truly needed. A life built alongside someone who hadn't chosen her out of convenience or obligation, but out of love. And the question she always left hanging when she told this story wasn't about courage or rebellion. It was about truth. Because in the end, it wasn't just about choosing a man, it was about choosing herself. "I lost the life I was told I should want, but I found the one I really needed. Now I ask you, would you have the courage to follow your heart, even if it meant leaving everything behind? To face judgmental stares, closed doors, and the weight of being misunderstood, just to experience something that deep down you know is real? If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes, true love hides in the most unlikely places. And maybe, who knows, your story is about to begin the moment you decide to no longer say yes to something that isn't your destiny.